Conceptualization is just defining a concept. So it just means drawing very clear, specific boundaries around these terms that we're using and making them tangible, bracketing them into one set of meaning. So again, we're simply defining a term. Like what do we mean by democracy, for example? Okay? Because a lot of these concepts obviously are abstract. It's very important for us to set definitional boundaries around them. So there's lots of ways to conceptualize, and I just want to quickly go through these. The first is by a synonym or any kind of linguistic definition that's already in place and recognized as a verifiable definition, like what you find in the dictionary, for example, or a scholarly publication. A classification scheme. You can say, what I mean by this type of a sex offender is I am using the already existing classification scheme of sex offenders as set by the state of Ohio, for example. I'm going to be using that set of definitions to conceptualize but what I mean by a sex offender. Definition by enumeration. For example, the Department of Health and Human Services for 2014 defines a family of four as living below the poverty level from an average income of $23,850 for a family of four is the threshold that's set as the level of poverty. Sorry. Okay. Definition by example. That simply means the kind of democratic system as exists in the United States. So already we can go exactly and point to what is done in the United States. By exclusion is whenever we say, well, by democracy, I am not talking about the following, okay? Or by sex offender, I am not talking about those who engage in X, okay? So that's by exclusion, as long as we're clear by what we mean by our definitions. Now, operationalization is when we define these concepts so that they can be measured empirically. We can gather evidence to point to our concepts. The main thing to think about is that we do this every day without knowing most of the time. For example, if you're engaged in a discussion with somebody and they say, well, these people are more religious, they're more religious in the South than they are in the North. You might either agree or you might say, well, what do you mean by religious? There's lots of ways to talk about to call somebody religious. What do you mean by that? Whenever you say that, you're asking them to operationalize the concept religiosity. So there's lots of ways. You could say, well, the number of times somebody reads a book, they read more books in the South. And you go, well, that's not somebody's religious, if somebody's just reading. Well, you could say, well, it's how many times does one go to religious services per month? Because you have to bracket out what time period you're talking about in a scientific operationalization. How often do they donate? How often do they perform pilgrimages or donate their time? Okay, so there's lots of ways to operationalize a concept. And few are perfect, because anytime you're going to state your definition, you might have people who might disagree. The important thing, and that we've certainly talked about, is that you clearly state how you're going to operationalize each concept, because that's going to affect the outcome and the conclusions that you draw.